this first part, we're going to discuss the development of the British town class cruiser HMS Belfast specifically, and some more general details of the class as a whole. This class's design would follow in the wake of the London Naval Treaty, and would see the introduction of the triple 6-inch turret into the Royal Navy. It would be made up of 10 ships and 3 subclasses, of firstly the Southampton type, which consisted of Newcastle, Southampton, Sheffield, Glasgow, and Birmingham. Next would be the Gloucester subclass, consisting of Gloucester, Liverpool, and Manchester. Finally, the Edinburgh subclass would consist of Edinburgh and Belfast. For the rest of the series, we will follow the career and service history of HMS Belfast, because I find her to be an interesting ship, and with being a museum ship, I find her story a little bit more endearing, as you can actually go and see her. Anyway, let's actually get into the video. A good place to start is following the London Naval Treaty and the distinction of cruisers that came from it. Cruisers would be distinguished by their main battery gun caliber. Ships armed with guns up to 6.1-inch caliber would be considered light cruisers, while those up to 8-inch caliber guns would be considered heavy cruisers. The Royal Navy would be limited in the amount of cruisers that they could build, with a permitted total of 192,200 tons of completed 6-inch armed cruisers as of December 31st, 1936. Total replacement tonnage between April of 1930 and December of 1936 was to not exceed 91,000 tons. Ships to be retained could be 101,480 tons in total, which limited new construction of cruisers to 90,720 tons. All of this to say that the Royal Navy had to meet their 50 cruiser goal by 1936, meaning in the allotted time they would have to build 14 cruisers, including that of the 1929 building program, HMS Leander. Cruisers would take usually 3 years to build, so the Admiralty decided on a program that starting in 1930, 3 cruisers would be built and would continue until 1933. But, including Leander, that would leave the British only with 13 ships. Where would the 14th come from? Well, the Admiralty thought of that. Australia would provide the 14th as a replacement for the outdated HMAS Brisbane. Seeing how British cruisers from World War I were mostly obsolete, the treaty would lay out a 16-year age for ships laid down before January of 1920, and a 20-year age after that. The Admiralty planned to retain 14 of the 17 ships, which would be between 16 and 20 years old in 1936, basically putting the Admiralty in a position where they believed that the London Naval Treaty a short-term solution, where it should be reviewed when the agreement expired. Next, we come to an important stage in the development of the town class, the idea for the triple turret. Approving the idea for the triple 6-inch mount in 1932 as a feature of the improved Leander, which became the Amphion class. Technology, however, wasn't exactly caught up with the ambitions of the Royal Navy at this point. Eventually, as time went on and technology developed, as well as larger hulls becoming more feasible in comparison to what other nations were building. Unfortunately, with the United States ordering the Brooklyn class and the Imperial Japanese ordering the construction of the Mogamis, the Leander class couldn't simply stand up to the 6-inch armed cruisers of the world. Not to mention the French cruisers who were most comparable to the Leander at this point, at 7,500 tons. With those extra 500 tons in the Leander, it would be quite useful. Believing now with this treaty system, they should abandon hopes of getting the 14 ships they initially wanted, and instead try to build larger ships that would make them more comparable to other cruisers of naval powers. This was especially prudent with the rapidly deteriorating international situation, with things like the Japanese invasion of Manchuria in September of 1931, the failure of the Geneva Disarmament Conference in March of 1932, not to mention Hitler's rearmament of Germany in 1934, along with Benito Mussolini's growing naval power and his war with Abyssinia in 1935. With all this in mind, on July 15, 1936, the British government invoked the escalator clause of the 1930 London Naval Treaty in time to stop the scrapping of the overage cruisers built during the First World War, and to provide the Royal Navy with additional tonnage to build new cruisers. As I previously mentioned, other navies were building more powerful 6-inch armed cruisers. The initial plan was to continue to build modified Leander and Arethusa classes, but it was eventually decided that the Royal Navy could not continue to build small cruisers, which would be outmatched by other new foreign ships. By mid-1933, the Royal Navy was setting up plans for a ship with 4 triple turrets, trading speed for firepower, with these new ships having a reduced speed of 30 knots. With this combination, they believed that the ships could be built at 7,800 tons, but more realistically, the allowed tonnage would have supported an 8,600-ton design. The requirement for this class would be for trade protection, with their 12 6-inch guns and a long-range anti-aircraft battery of twin 4-inch guns, with close-range anti-aircraft provided by half-inch machine guns. Although not required in trade protection duties, a torpedo armament was desirable, when the ships inevitably worked with the fleet, deciding on a triple launcher on either side. The ships would also be capable of operating aircraft from a catapult, which would offer the cruisers the ability to sink an enemy commerce raider with their planes, as they would be supplied with torpedoes and a considerable bomb load. The ships were to have sufficient protection against the Leander class's 6-inch shells, with the magazine and shell rooms hopefully being immune at ranges of 21,000 yards, and machinery at 16,000 yards. As more changes and other additions, including a change in speed requirements, by the time the design was approved in November of 1933, it was a 9,050-ton design. The first one was Minotaur, later changed to Newcastle. Skipping ahead to the 1936/7 program, there would be 2 follow-ons to the Southamptons or Town class, and 5 Didos, which were to be the last ships laid down before the 1936 London Naval Treaty, which would restrict new cruisers to 8,000 tons, becoming enforceable on December 31st. Therefore, the Royal Navy was free to use every last bit of the 10,000 tons available for HMS Edinburgh and Belfast. Initially, the basis of the design would be a new quadruple 6-inch turret, to which it was expected to weigh 188 tons, with a 3-inch shield and a 2-inch roof. Because of the design, it would actually require few personnel to operate. In early October of 1935, the Director of Naval Construction asked how much it would cost to produce a 10,000-ton cruiser with 4 quadruple turrets and a speed of 32.5 knots. By April of 1936, there were studies done of modified Town-class designs, with 3 turrets forward and one with 5 turrets forward, arranged like that of battleships HMS Nelson and Rodney. They would have the same aircraft arrangement of the Southamptons, but the belt armor would have to be trimmed to stay within the 10,000-ton limit, since they would be longer. Also, they used the same machinery found in the Southamptons, so the ships would be slower. However, they continued to review more modified Town-class ships with differing turret layouts and number of guns, with some having quadruple, triple, or even double mounts, as well as differing armor thicknesses. Eventually, the design board went with the triple rather than the quadruple turrets. This decision was later attributed to an uncertainty about the necessary distance between turrets. The weight saved from this would go into deck protection. Not to mention, the rate of fire was improved of these 6-inch guns. These ships would be the heaviest cruisers since the County-class cruisers built in the late 1920s. The final design for the ships would be tentatively approved in July of 1936, as armor was going to be revised. Belfast would displace a little under 10,000 tons, on paper, but as her career went on, she had more and more things added on. Her standard displacement would be 11,919 tons in 1945. She would have 4 oil-fired boilers that powered 4 turbines that drove 4 shafts, producing around 80,000 shaft horsepower, giving the ship a top speed of 32 knots. Her main armament would consist of 12 6-inch or 152mm guns and triple turrets, with 2 turrets superfiring forward and 2 aft. She would have 12 dual-purpose 4-inch or 102mm guns and twin turrets, along with 16 2-pounder or 40mm anti-aircraft guns and quadruple mounts, along with having 8 half-inch anti-aircraft guns and twin mounts. Finally, she would carry 6 torpedoes and 2 triple launchers on either side of the ship. Belfast would have a main belt of 4.5 inches or 114mm. Her turret faces would have 4 inches of armor or 102mm and 2 inches or 50.8mm on the sides and roof. Her decks would range from 2 to 3 inches or 50.8 to 76mm depending on the part of the ship. She would also be equipped to carry aircraft carrying supermarine walruses during the war. She would be laid down in December of 1936, launched in March of 1938, and commissioned in August of 1939. This is where we'll leave Belfast until part 2 of the series, where we'll go more into her career during World War II. I hope you've enjoyed this video and please remember to like and subscribe.